Hi guys, we're on a typical test drive, and I thought I'd walk you through some of the things I look at when I go on our test drive. We're in beautiful Red Rock Canyon. As you can see, we're going to be heading up to the mountains behind Red Rock for the off-road part of this test. We do have to go easy on this Jeep because it's got 40-inch tires and it's basically not lifted, so we don't have very much clearance. The customer is going to install some coilovers when he gets it back. We did install a Dynatrac D80 in the rear and a D60 in the front, which is their elite package, and we'll talk about that. So obviously the first thing I'm concerned with is engine performance. This vehicle just came out of the shop and it runs perfect. There are no unusual noises, there is no unusual transmission shifting, the engine is running cool. And I'm not going to get too much into engine performance because we talk about that all the time. I'm going to talk about some of the other things that I look for on these test drives. After engine performance, the next thing is the suspension. I want to make sure it goes down the road straight. Now, we do have a little bit of an issue with this one, and it has to do with the geometry and the suspension. Some of you guys have probably watched my video on torque steer, but watch this. If I let the steering wheel go, see that little bit of steering wheel movement? That is torque steer. Now, it's not real bad, but I've identified the issue, and that is that the track bar on the front axle is mounted too low. I've already spoken to Dynatrac about it, and we're going to correct that. Other than that, it drives pretty straight. Transmission downshift's good. This is a 6-liter L96 engine. This customer wanted to expedition this Jeep and run inexpensive fuel in it. So he's basically setting this Jeep up to be reliable, durable, go the distance out in the middle of nowhere. So if you're going into Mexico or Canada or where they have crappy fuel, this is the perfect engine for that. And this engine's got plenty of power for these 40s. Even going up and down these mountain passes, it's completely effortless. So let's take a look at this dash if you can see it. This is the dash as displayed after I started it up, other than I did turn the cruise control on. Now you can see that the tire pressure monitors are active and that our tire pressure is a little bit low. For whatever reason, this Jeep is set to 43 PSI, which I am not going to inflate the 40s to. So that can be reset with a ProCal or another tuner. You will see that the tire pressure monitoring light is on. The speedometer is off because we went to oversized tires, so we'll correct that. You'll notice that our locker lights are flashing. When we installed the Dynatrac axles, we were able to install the stock Rubicon solenoid connectors, but there is no switch feedback. So we'll correct that at the shop. Let's test our cruise control. I'm going to come over and first we're going to try the on-off button, functional. We're going to set the cruise. We're going to accelerate, and if I accelerate hard enough, you're going to see the transmission downshift. We're going to cancel. We're going to come back to resume, and there you go. Everything's working good. We're going to check that I can turn it off with the brake. Cruise control is working as expected, and I will say that these cruise controls, let me set it. We're in cruise right now, and you can see we're going up some of these undulating hills, and we use the factory GM cruise control algorithms, meaning it's done right through the GM computer. And even though we're going up and down these hills, hello pink Jeep, you will notice that that needle's almost painted on. It really holds a tight tolerance on your cruise control speed. So you're going to notice we're going to be going down this hill now. You can feel the power come back. Yes, we did overrun a mile an hour or two, but it's far better than anything in the aftermarket. We are going to check our tap shift in several different ways. So here we are cruising along. I am in drive, and I'm going to pull it back into the tap shift gate. Now, we are in cruise control still, remember. We can use cruise in tap. And remember, if you want, you can actually use these buttons, and I'm going to accelerate a little here. You can use these up and down buttons on your steering wheel for tap shift if you choose. This customer has it set so that we're going to be using his bump shifter. So we're going to bring it back into the bump shift gate. You're going to notice that it says D because we're in top gear. Now if I bump shift to the left, you're going to see that it says 5 and the RPM goes up. Let's bump shift it down one more time, 4, and we're about 3,000 RPM. Now I'm going to bump shift up one to test the upshift function, and then I'm just going to put it back into drive. So our bump shift is working as intended. Now guys, use bump shift whenever you can, or tap shift, because it uses with something called RPM match shifting. And what that means is when the engine knows that the transmission is going to shift, it tries to match the RPM for the next gear. And this is a 6L80, and a 6L80 is a dual clutch transmission. So what that does is it really smooths the shift out. Check this out. I'm going to put it back into bump shift. Now when I drop back into fifth, watch how smooth this is. I barely noticed the shift. And you notice that it only changed a couple of hundred RPM. Back into drive. We're going to show you some more tap shift functions here, but let's look at some of the AC controls. Now this JK does have automatic air conditioning, so we're going to check all the different functions. We're going to check recirculate air conditioning in both the automatic mode and in the manual mode. So if I were to bring this down into the automatic mode, that sets our fan speed for automatic. We're going to turn recirculation off. We're going to bring this over to automatic. Now the HVAC system is in the automatic mode. I can feel the air coming out, and since we're down there at about 60 degrees on the middle knob, the outlet temperature is just over 60 degrees. It's pretty cold. Now here's something important, and this doesn't affect just swaps. This is across the board in the JKs. Turn this knob up to about 70 degrees, and you should feel not only the fan speed come down, but you should also feel the temperature warm up a little bit. If you don't, if you really got to wind this thing all the way over to get the temperature to warm up, then you got a problem. And we can talk about that a little bit. One is you might want to reset your HVAC controller. There's actually a reset ECU function, and that will reset all the door positions. There's also a calibration that you can do on the HVAC. Now if you do that and you still have a problem with temperature control, and this is actually blowing pretty warm, and in the HVAC mode it'll actually change the modes too. So as you select up and down in the temperature range, it'll select different door modes. But getting back to the calibrating the temperature, if you have to crank that knob all the way up to get it to go warm, you got an issue. Chrysler does have several HVAC controller updates available. Also, storing codes in your instrument cluster, TIPM, or your HVAC controller can cause funny air conditioning or HVAC issues. So keep an eye on that. Now it's pretty obvious that we're going to go through every one of these modes. We're going to go into the manual mode now, and I like the manual mode the best because now, and we're going to take the fan out of the automatic mode. Now I can control my fan speed where I want it, and my temperature where I want it, and what mode door I have. When this little yellow light is on, that means that you're in the air conditioning mode, or the compressor is selected on. And the compressor isn't selected on just for air conditioning. You can use it to dehumidify the windshield when you wind these other knobs up to the top. So I'm not going to get too much more further into the HVAC, but let's just say it is pretty complex, and I do test every mode on these test drives. I make sure that our heat range goes from hot to cold properly. In the summer, we want to see outlet temperatures about 40 to 50 degrees lower than ambient, and in the winter, obviously, a little bit cooler than that. If you have a left outlet that's not blowing warm in the winter, and the center outlets are medium warm and the right outlet is hot, that probably means you have a clogged heater core. Listening and feeling carefully for vibrations. This Jeep is dead smooth. I don't hear the engine, I only hear tire and wind noise. As mentioned, this speedometer is off, and you can see we're cruising well under 2,000 RPM at over 50 miles an hour. So this is something that I tell my customers is gear correctly. This customer did gear correctly. Even with these 40s, we are cruising along comfortably on the highway, yet this thing still has plenty of power off the line. We just re-geared a Jeep that had 538s in it with 37s, I believe, and it was just a go-kart with a Gen 5 engine. So we ended up having to re-gear that Jeep to make it work properly. You don't want to be cruising along at 2,500 RPM at 70 miles an hour because you're just wasting gas and the engine's making a lot of noise. And like I mentioned, I'm in tune with the vehicle right now. I'm feeling the steering wheel, I'm feeling the floorboards, I'm feeling the pedals, I'm listening for noises. Of course, we'll do some acceleration tests. We'll see how the transmission shifts at wide open throttle. And that can be an issue sometimes because if your vehicle's speed isn't set correctly, and you will notice that we just turned our low fuel light on. That is something else that I always check. We do not affect the Chrysler CAN network when it comes to the fuel gauge. but it's something that we want to make sure works properly. I've had customers where they put in custom gauge faces and the needle is off, so you might think you have a quarter of a tank, but you're really on empty. This is an LS engine with a 6-speed, so I test them a little bit differently, the transmission, that I test the 8-speed LTs. The 8-speed LTs, you give it some throttle and they just go. They don't really downshift. But what I like to do is give it a little bit of throttle, a little bit of throttle, a little bit of throttle, and you see that transmission downshift. A little more, a little more. And what I'm looking for is that the transmission downshifts appropriately, meaning based on your command and your load. If you're just cruising down the road and the transmission downshifts, that's a very uncomfortable feeling. And it's actually something we experience a lot with on the 5-speed Hemis. So the 6L80 is almost reading your mind. It's an excellent adaptive transmission, which means it learns. And I've only got maybe 20, 30, 40 miles on this Jeep, but it has already learned to the way I drive, and I'm perfectly happy with the way this one runs. There is no driveline vibration. One of the things I try to do is get the vehicle at different speeds, and if the drive shaft or the CVs have a harmonic vibration, that becomes apparent. You can differentiate engine vibrations from driveline vibrations usually by getting at the speed where the driveline is vibrating and then upshift and downshift the transmission, which changes the engine RPM. And if the vibration stays at the same frequency, then it's most likely a driveline vibration. We mostly have driveline vibration problems in two-door Jeeps because their drive shafts can be about 20 inches long, especially when guys lift them up and we start getting some high angles. We're going to make sure the radio functions properly. Believe it or not, the radio can be a problem, especially if you have an aftermarket head unit like an Alpine. I've seen those blink out a lot. I'm feeling the brake pedal right now, and it's a little bit soft in this one, but it's not too bad. Remember, we put bigger axles and bigger brakes in this vehicle. If you go to, let's say, 3/4 or 1 ton brakes, you may have to go to a bigger booster like the JK8 booster. This one seems to stop pretty good. One of the reasons I want to get gas is when you fill up your JK, the fuel trim adaptives change, because you could be changing the grade of your fuel, the type of fuel. You could be going from California fuel to federal fuel that has less oxygen. So by doing that, it's a good test of the fuel trims being where they need to be. So we're going to get gas and we're going to come back. Regular gas in this, because it's a 6-liter, which is really nice. Premium right now is $3.75, and regular is $3.39. So there's a little bit of a savings there. One of the other things I check for when I'm filling up the vehicle is fuel spitback. The early JKs, as most of you know, had a problem where if you filled it up too fast, the fuel would back up in the filler neck and then spit back out. I'm happy to say this one didn't have that problem. Jeep did come out with a updated intermediate tube that has a flapper in it, and that's really the best solution for fuel spitback. Replacing the fuel tank and all that, I found, never really helps. Okay, so we're going to start this vehicle up, and this vehicle has not only remote start, but it's an automatic JK, so it has what's called one-touch start. What that means is you're supposed to be able to just turn the key to the crank position and it does the rest. You don't have to hold the key on. Now in manual transmission JKs you do. They don't have one-touch start, obviously. They have a clutch interrupt. But on the automatics you should be able to just stick the key in, touch it to the start position, and it will crank until it recognizes the engine is running. Then it'll cut the starter off automatically. So let's give that a shot. And as you can see, that worked perfectly. I'm looking for check engine lights, and of course we don't have any. You can see that the airbag and the seat belt and the other systems bulb checked. And we've got a ding because we've got a tire pressure monitor going off, and we're not going to inflate these tires to 43 pounds. We're gonna correct that with a tuner. The power steering pump in this vehicle is slightly noisy. I already talked to my lead mechanic about that. We're going to replace it. It works perfect, but we don't want to have that little bit of a whine. And this is something that I've already documented. I actually keep a list on my phone for all the issues that we need to address, and the power steering pump is already on that list. Okay, so we're going up this hump behind the backside of Red Rock, and it's about a 6-degree grade. Again, our speedometer's off a little bit. The speed limit's about 65, so we're going to hold about 65 here. Now, this 6-liter is holding the speed at 2,000 RPM going up this hill in top gear, which is pretty good. But I'm going to choose to come back into manual mode, bump shift down to 5th. Then I'm going to turn my cruise control on, and I'm going to set it. This is going to be comfortable because when we get up there a little bit further, the transmission is probably going to downshift into fifth on its own. So by locking it into fifth gear right now, I can avoid that. And I can basically stay in one gear all the way up and over this mountain. And as a bonus, I'm in cruise control while I'm in the tap shift mode, which I find to be a big advantage. Guys, as mentioned earlier, our MOCAN module has the ability to switch the tap shift input. You do have the ability to tap shift right through these cruise control switches, and you can do it while in cruise control, and I'm going to explain that to you. You put the shifter, whether it's a bump shifter or a 6-position early JK shifter, into the manual gate. That activates the up and down button for tap shift. Now, if you want to go into cruise control and tap shift, what you do is you stay in drive, you set your cruise control to whatever speed you want, you then bring it back into the manual gate, and then you can bump shift up and down, which is really good because like on the hill I'm on right now, I want to keep it in fifth. I don't want it to upshift. Or if I was going down the back side of this hill, I might want to keep it in fourth because it's pretty steep. And again, I don't want it to upshift on me. So having the ability to tap shift in cruise control mode to me is a huge advantage, and we can support it in both ways, where you have the tap shift independent of the steering wheel and where you have it incorporated into the steering wheel. If you have an early JK, you can use your cruise control stock to tap shift and for cruise control combined, or I really do prefer to just use a separate toggle switch or rocker switch like GM uses and keep that separated from the cruise switch, because when the cruise switch or the tap shift switch is on the steering wheel and you're spinning your wheel around, you don't know which way is up and which way is down. It's a good function when you're on the highway and you want to be Ricky Racer, but not off-road in my opinion. In any event, the MOCAN module is adaptable and allows you to do whichever input you want. So we're approaching the top of the hill now, and you can see leaving it in fifth gear was perfect. We're about 2,500 RPM. We're going up this 6-7 degree grade. This engine hasn't complained at all, not running hot at all. We're staying just to the left of center, and I'm going to mention something about the temperature gauge. With our CAN module, we no longer use the customer satisfaction settings that Chrysler uses on the coolant temp gauge. What Chrysler does is they know that you want to see that gauge about in the middle. So they have the gauge, the needle in the middle over a wide range of temperatures, all the way from about 185 degrees to about 230 degrees. The downside to that, and I'm going to go ahead and turn my cruise off with the brake pedal. And you can see we're at a cruise and we're coming up on some construction. The temperature gauge is nice to have it at half all the time, but the problem is if you're at 230 degrees, you might have a problem and may not know it because the gauge isn't telling you that. So what we've done is we've reprogrammed the temperature gauge to be linear, which means as the temperature goes up degree by degree, your gauge will go up 1 degree at a time. And normally on this hill, I will see that gauge go slightly over to the right because it is somewhat of a haul, especially with tall gears and 40-inch tires. But this little 6-liter, the 6-liters do have lower compression, so they tend to run a little bit cooler, and we're not having any issues with this one. This vehicle is fitted with a pulse width modulated, I want to say a Camaro SS fan, but it might be the JL fan. We're running both now, and they both work really well. They have 19-inch blades. They're both fully controlled for transmission temperature, coolant temperature, intake air temperature, all that. We couldn't do that with the older Pentastar fan because the old Pentastar fan had an inverse pulse width, and we couldn't make that play well with the GM operating system. In fact, the Pentastar fan doesn't really play well with almost any operating system, including Chrysler's, in my opinion. But the JL fan has been a really big improvement. So right now, I'm feeling the steering wheel for any kickback. I'm feeling for torque steer. I'm feeling for bump steer. I'm feeling the brakes. I'm listening to the engine. Sometimes I can hear interferences in the engine. Let's say a dipstick tube is hitting a battery tray or something. This one seems to be perfect. I notice nothing. I don't hear the engine. I don't feel the engine. It's almost like an electric motor. This vehicle has zero vibration in it. And with these 40-inch tires, it's absorbing the bumps pretty good, even though these tires are pumped up pretty high. I hear no excessive rattles. Many of the Jeeps that I drive have roof racks and tire carriers and other things that rattle, D-rings, and I've got to tune all that out of my head and try to listen for the core. noises that I'm concerned with, things like clunking noises or bottoming out noises. Those are what I'm concerned about. But I will say, after doing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of swaps, you do get to a point where you get focused on specific frequencies and specific noises that you can narrow down very quickly. I remember in the old days, you'd hear a rattle or a noise, and we even had instruments to help us directionally find where that rattle was. But it's really getting to a point where that's not necessary anymore. So we're going to put a drone up in the air, maybe get a little bit of drone footage, and we'll be back in a minute. So we've had it sitting here idling for a while with the air conditioning on towards the top of the mountain. I'm listening to the cooling fan and other engine noises. Let's get back in and get to the top. Now I'm leaving it in 4 high, going up this hill with the air conditioning on because I'm testing the temps. Alright, so wheeling to the top of the mountain with the air conditioning on, here's our temperatures. Coolant temp's about 208, intake temp 150. Now oil temp is a calculated value, that's not a real value. There is no oil temp sensor in this operating system, so it's probably actually a little bit lower than that, but that's still acceptable. You'll see our transmission temp comes and goes. This is about 150, but it just has to do with the way this adapter communicates on the CAN network. AC pressure is about 230, which is about right. It's not a hot day today, but it's a little bit warm out. And then, of course, I'm monitoring our knock retard. So let's get back on the trail. Turn our brake off. And again, we got to go easy on this Jeep because we don't have a whole lot of wheel well clearance. Now you'll notice that this trail has a lot of what I call caliche, which is rock, and that really shakes these Jeeps up. You'll notice with 40s, the ride is a bit smoother, but it still tosses you around, and that's what we're trying to do here. I don't air these tires down. I don't know if you can see, but we're about 37 PSI. I'm not looking for a smooth ride. I'm looking to shake this Jeep up. For any of you interested, that's Mount Potosi up there. That's where Carol Lombard's plane crashed way back in the 1940s. And Clark Gable came out to get her body at the Pioneer, well, Good Springs, where the Pioneer Saloon is. A lot of you know where that is, and that's way down that way by Sandy Valley. I've actually wheeled from here to Good Springs many times. In fact, there's a lot of awesome trails out here, guys. The old Mormon trails, and there's just so much to do in Las Vegas other than the Strip. If you ever get out this way, pull out an off-road map and hit some of these trails. Alright guys, we're at the top of the world, or at least the top of the mountain. That's Las Vegas down there. I'm going to put this Jeep into four-wheel drive low to go down this trail, and I'm going to show you how I do it. We're in drive right now, as you can see. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rolling slowly. I'm going to throw it in neutral, and then I'm going to pull back on the four-wheel drive lever, and we're in 4 low. Back into drive. Now, I'm already over accelerating, so I'm going to kick us back into manual mode, and you can see we're in 3rd gear. Now that's actually a good gear, and it's probably the gear I would have selected. But let's go ahead and bump shift down 1 gear. Now, did you notice that RPM match shift? I haven't touched the brake, but the shift was entirely smooth. The wheel speed travel remained constant. There was no lurch. So we're going to be going down this grade here, and we have full control with bump shift. I'm not using my brakes at all. Let's come around. Now, let's just say I want to slow down a little bit here. Bring it back into 1st. And I think you'll see how smooth that was. Now, this has brought me to a pretty slow crawl. And this is what I tell a lot of you guys is don't overgear. When you got an LS or especially an LT with an 8-speed, you don't need to go 4-5-1 in your transfer case. If you want to crawl exclusively, yes, do it. But right now I'm in first gear and I'm going down this hill at exactly about the speed I want to. In fact, I'm probably going a little bit too slow. So what I'm going to do is bump shift up into second gear. And you can see here, if I had my shift control here on the steering wheel, you can see how that would just be a pain. So let's bump up into second. See, we're building a little bit of speed up. Now I know I'm going to want to be in third or fourth up here. So let's just, actually I'm just going to go back into drive. And because we're in 4 low, we got plenty of compression braking. Alright guys, we're going to turn our lockers on. I know that they're not required, but we want to test them. So this is a Rubicon. So we're going to disconnect our sway bar. And I've got the lockers engaged. You'll listen to the lights stop flashing. Okay, now I can feel the steering wheel tighten up on me. So we know our lockers are engaged. Now, even though the front locker is engaged, it's not doing me any good because I've got hubs on this. So I'm going to get out and I'm going to lock these hubs and we'll be back. Okay, front hubs are locked and we're back on the trail. We're in 4-wheel drive low, air conditioning on. We're in the drive mode, we're not in the tap shift mode. But I do know a little bit up the trail here, we're going to need to go back into a lower gear to keep us from overspeeding. So I'm going to show you something here. I'm going to come to a stop. While at a stop, I'm putting us back into bump shift. You notice that it says first gear. It's because we're in first gear. But let's say I want to go down this trail, and I know I don't want to really go over fourth. What I'm going to do is I'm going to bump shift. 1, 2, 3, 4. That has just set my maximum gear. So 1, 2, 3, 4. I don't got to touch nothing. We're in fourth gear right now. It's not going to upshift. It's not going to downshift. And let me qualify that. It will downshift if required. If you come to a stop, it can't stay in fourth gear. Or if you put it under heavy acceleration and it's bogging down, it will downshift. Now, I'm actually overspeeding a little bit here, faster than I want to go. We're going to bump shift back into third. And you can see with that RPM match shifting, it was very smooth. Now I'm completely off the gas, and what I can feel is the compression braking coming in and out, keeping me at a constant about 10 miles an hour. So this is comfortable for me. By bumping up one gear, I can go a little bit faster. By bumping down a gear, I can go a little bit slower. But again, I am not using the brake at all. I'm letting the tap shift and the compression braking control the speed of the vehicle. Now I'm hearing some noises. Like right now, I'm hearing this chattering noise out of this CB microphone. And I tune that out of my head, and I'm trying to listen for other noises, rhythmic noises like a belt or a squeak. But I don't hear anything in this vehicle. It's really solid. I will say that this 6-liter engine has to be the #1 choice for expedition. It has one of the fewest parts counts. It's got an iron block so that it's pretty much bulletproof. You can run these out of oil or overheat them a little bit more than you can the aluminum ones, and they hold together. It's got slightly lower compression, so you can run the lower grade fuels. Runs a little bit cooler. If you had to cross the desert, this is probably the engine that you want. Does it match the technology of the new Gen 5 LTs? No, of course not. Although they are coming out with a new 6-liter Gen 5 iron-blocked LT engine, which I'm really excited about. That thing is going to be a monster. I mean, the 6.2 LTs are monsters. So to get an iron-blocked LT that's built for heavy-duty trucks, you know GM spent a lot of time taking that LT and making it reliable for exactly what I'm doing right now. So I think that might be a really good engine choice in the future. All right, so I'm going a little bit slow. Let's bump shift up to 5th. A little varmint out there. Now we're going to be going over a just a little incline here. So what I'm going to do is we're going to slowly bump shift back from 5th to 4th to 3rd to 2nd, and what the heck, let's go into first gear. You can see how easy that is. Now it has slowed me down to where I can just walk down this hill. There's no more need, guys, for 4-wheel drive, so we're gonna put it back into 2-wheel drive high. Okay, so neutral, firmly, but slowly move the shift lever up into 4-wheel high, and we're back in 2-wheel drive. Let's go back into drive. So I'm going to show you one more tap shift option. Let's say you're just cruising along like I am now. Let's turn our sway bar off. You know, I really don't like that Jeep put the switches on the left side in these newer JKs. Fumble around to find it. Got it. So let's say you're just cruising along and you're happy in the gear that you're in, or you want to lock it into a lower gear to go down a hill or up a hill. You don't actually need bump shift. All you got to do is move the shift lever into the bump shift gate. So watch this. I just moved it into the bump shift gate and we're in 2nd gear, and it's going to lock it in that gear. So I call that gear lock. So let's say you got a trailer and you're going down a hill. You don't have tap shift available to you. You just get it in the gear you want. You can actually throttle it, have a downshift, push it back into the manual gate, and there you go. You're locked into that gear. So there's a lot of versatility with the shift modes of the 6L80 and the 8L90. So guys, that's a little bit that goes into these test drives. We're looking for all sorts of things: engine performance, suspension, noises, interferences, cooling system performance, drivability, transmission shifting, fuel economy. One of the things we didn't even touch on was the engine performance that I monitor, which I'm looking at the oxygen sensor switching, I'm looking at the long-term fuel trims. So that's just about the end of this test drive. We're going to be coming back with some LT bills as well as some more LS bills. We've got several LT4 bills in the shop right now. I'm super excited about those. See how those do off-road. I know they're going to be a monster on-road. Got a couple of more LT1s, and I've got to say today that I think the LT1 is just a phenomenal powertrain combination with the 8L90. It's really gotten to the point where we've done enough of them to be comfortable in pretty much any environment. We've had guys wheel them hard through some of the toughest trails, and they're holding up. So I really look forward to driving the LTs. But what it really comes down to is your need. This JK is got a purpose, and that purpose is for expedition. This guy's done a good job putting together an expedition Jeep. Got large enough tires to go over most obstacles, got enough axle clearance, got a pretty much bulletproof engine with an iron block. Runs on almost any grade of fuel. Got a heavy-duty cooling system. Keep it cool in the summer. It's going to be a really solid Jeep for a long, long time. So we're going to head back to the shop, and we'll see you guys in the next video.